In all of my years of research and trial and experimentation, the one herb that seems to work the best and to be the most reliable for the most amount of people for sexual enhancement and athletic enhancement would have to be Polyrhachis ant extract. This, in combination with literally hundreds of testimonials and all sorts of different feedback and conversations that I've had with different clients, different people that have used this extract to a high degree of success for sexual enhancement, athletic enhancement. Talking to people who own gyms, people who are personal trainers, people who are professional athletes or mixed martial artists or professional fighters of different styles and forms, all the way to bodybuilders, all the way to younger to middle-aged men that are looking for just a little bit of help in the sexual department or the athletic department. Really, from all these different people and all this diverse sort of categories, the feedback is pretty well usually unanimous with, wow, I heard this stuff would work. I heard it was good, but I didn't really know how good it was. And that's one thing that's really unique about the Polyrhachis is it's surprisingly effective in small doses. Because many herbs that are either androgenic or male enhancement herbs, they maybe require large doses, or they require kind of a long time to really kick in, and with that oftentimes comes kind of a down regulation or kind of a natural tolerance to where the body doesn't really react to it anymore. One herb that comes to mind that a lot of people use is maca. Maca is a great herb for some people. For some people it doesn't really do anything. And then oftentimes what happens is maca works really well for maybe 3 to 5 days, maybe 7 days, maybe at most 2 weeks for some people. But then after that, the effects really just diminish and fall off, and you have to really cycle off of it, take a break, maybe come back a month or two later and start over. That's a really common thing with a lot of quote androgenic herbs that a lot of people are using. Another thing that comes to mind would be tribulus. People use that herb a lot. It works great for a little bit, and all of a sudden it stops working. And the one thing that I've heard about Polyrhachis is that these people don't typically notice these kinds of effects. They don't really notice sort of the down regulation or the lessening of effects, and they don't really notice that they have to keep upping their dosage. For me personally, when I've taken this herb, I've always stayed at a pretty small dosage range. And when I was actually first getting into it and I was wanting to push the limits and experiment and see actually what the higher limits were, I was doing high amounts every single day, probably 2 or 3 teaspoons a day total. And then after about a month of that, I went and had my hormone levels tested, and all of my androgen levels were actually quite high and quite elevated in a way that maybe isn't necessarily sustainable for the long term, but what that showed me was like, wow, this stuff is really doing something and really working. Now obviously I wasn't just taking Polyrhachis and sitting on the couch all day and playing Nintendo or whatever. Obviously, yeah, diet is important, exercise is important, and having the right herbs and supplements is also important. It forms a great foundation, a great combination. And really the more each of these things is really secure and solid, the greater results we're going to be able to create. So not only did I see those effects for my hormones and my androgen levels, but also a couple of my clients have sent me their results and told me their results, and they've had similar results and similar levels as well. And obviously they're doing it in a much more reasonable way than I was in that time, so their levels are much more in a sustainable, sort of reasonable way, which is really where we want to be. And oftentimes people get really into, you know, more is better and harder is better and longer is better and faster is better. And that might be good for a short time. We have to really start to consider the long term. And if people are getting into, you know, steroids and testosterone and all these exogenous sort of artificial chemicals, they don't really consider the long term. They just really get narrow-minded and focused. So that's why personally I'm more of a fan of things that are a bit more natural, things that yes are effective, but are more effective in a way that's helping the body to stay in more of a balanced, natural range of levels, not something that's so far extreme that we're just basically going to loop back around and have to deal with the whole problem all over again. And that's really a bitter lesson that a lot of people have had to learn the hard way through steroids or through stimulants or through whatever. So for me, again, coming back to the point of the video, Polyrachis is one of the most effective herbs for male sexual enhancement, but also athletic performance, athletic recovery, and really helping to keep the body in a more androgenic state of mind. Or it's not a state of mind, but a state of being, both hormonally, but also just how we feel inside, how we feel mentally. Because in the Chinese understanding, Polyrachis really works on the kidney energy and the liver energy, which is really the root of our drive and our willpower. So when it comes to working and getting things done and being productive and being creative, being effective, we need strong kidney energy, we need strong liver energy. But we need to do that in a way that is, again, balanced and makes sense for the long term. So again, Polyrachis is one of the best herbs to do that. Now, one last thing that I will say is that it works for a great deal of many people, but I've also seen that there's this very small chunk of the population that it really just doesn't seem to be appropriate for, which is true for nearly all supplements and all foods and all exercise. It's just kind of part of life. And really, people who seem to be very irritated and sort of really just on the brink of anger and frustration all the time, very hot-headed, very kind of yang excessive, typically don't really need Polyrachis anymore. What they need to do is learn to come back to balance and build some yin and learn to calm down and kind of chill out a little bit, and then they can take it in a probably might be a little bit more appropriate. But I've just seen that a couple of times. People kind of have this mindset where they're already excessive, they're already extreme. They just think more and more and more and more and more. That's not really always a big deal, and typically they notice that it just maybe makes them just a little bit more irritable or makes them a little bit more kind of yang excessive. So that would be an instance where it's really not appropriate. Also, if we're dealing with like cold and flu and we're really sick, that's another time where it's not really appropriate to take it. Probably just lay off and rest and sort of just come back to it once we're feeling better and once we're feeling a bit healthier, which again is kind of a common sense thing. We just really need to tune into our body and be able to discern that. So we're going to take it, before a workout, whether that's running or martial arts or yoga or weights, or even before sexual activity. Typically, a dosage is 1/2 to 1 teaspoon, maybe an hour or so before the desired activity. And people will typically feel that dosage. People will typically feel that pretty quickly in the body. That's one of the interesting things about this extract. So I would definitely recommend staying within that dosage range, and you can definitely dial it back a little bit if you need to, or dial it up if you need to, but start there, listen to the body, and just really tune in and see how you. If you want to learn more about the Polyrachis extract, check the link below. You can check out the 20-to-1 Polyrachis extract, which is extremely potent, extremely effective, even in very small doses. And then a little bit goes a long way and it becomes very economical and very common sense. And really something that, if we're interested in male sexual enhancement or athletic enhancement, probably should be at the top of the list. So hopefully this video has been helpful. If you have any questions or comments, post them below, and I'll talk to you soon.